The Catholics of Oz is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to episode 14 of The Catholics of Oz. Catholics of Oz is a show where we discuss faith, culture, and what's been happening from an Australian perspective. Whether it's synods or science, apostolates and apps, providence or productivity, you can hear it right now on The Catholics of Oz. Hi there, I'm Lindsay Sants, and welcome to the 14th episode of The Catholics of Oz. Thank you for joining us. Joining me today is Caroline Knight. Caroline, how you doing?
I am fine-ish, thank you. I'm still suffering from winter, but I'm here.
You were battling the bug last time we recorded, and it sounds like it's still bothering you a little bit.
This is a very bad one, yeah. It keeps going round and round the family. We just can't get rid of it.
It's the joys of Australian winter.
Yeah.
And Jared, how are you going today?
Well, good to be here.
Excellent. So, we've got a couple of topics today, so why don't we get started with Faith Beyond Borders?
Well, I'm actually feeling rather good about this. I think we've all arrived at a very special place, eh? Oh. Spiritually, ecumenically.
How do you make somebody love you without affecting free will?
Welcome to my world, son. You come up with an answer to that one, you let me know.
Yes, I had to work very hard to pass Latin and theology.
Oh, quite. Those are, of course, the most important things.
Oh, yeah.
I'd sit this one out, Cap.
I don't see how I can.
These guys come from legend. They're basically gods.
There's only one God, man. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that.
So today's Faith Beyond Borders is a short and simple one. In episode 1 or 2 of our podcast, it was very early in the year, we talked about the Australian Catholic Church's Plenary Council. And the Plenary Council is basically a gathering of the Australian Catholic bishops, which is happening in October in 2020. And this council is a discussion of where the Australian Church is and where it still needs to go if we're going to be effective evangelizers and an effective church for the future of Australia. So what's happened right now is that the responses that we spoke about to those questions in episode 1 or 2, I keep forgetting which episode, but the responses were all collated. So essentially what happened was, there's a few statistics here. There were 17,457 submissions made. There were 4,699 group submissions, 12,758 individual submissions, and that's how you get your 17,000, I'm hoping, maths-wise. But overall, there were over 220,000 participants who contributed in some way, shape, or form to this council. So what's happened is the council team has put everything that's been said together into 6 themes. So these 6 themes include missionary and evangelizing, inclusive, participatory, and synodal, prayerful and Eucharistic, humble, healing, and merciful, a joyful, hope-filled, and servant community, and a community which is open to conversion, renewal, and reform. And these are basically the key words and key things that Australians have been saying to the church about the mission of the church in the future. So what they then did is they produced 6 reports, which are very, very detailed about each one of these themes. And for a simple summary of each of these reports, what they've put together is a word cloud, which we just discovered before this podcast that the word cloud doesn't represent the number of responses given. So, for example, if you've got words that are bigger in the word cloud, it doesn't mean that that was the things that were most said. But certainly a good summary of what the 220,000 individuals who responded were saying. So I just wanted to go through a couple of those very, very quickly, and then we'll just discuss some of our responses to those. So under the theme of the church being more missionary and more evangelizing, there were things like authentic faith teaching in Catholic schools, better preparation and support for married couples, a greater role for women in the church, and people remaining faithful to church teaching. And this is a very brief summary. Under the inclusive topic, there were things like modernizing church teachings, people listening to each other more, servant leadership, caring for our neighbors, a greater focus on Jesus, The flipping of the what it says here is the pyramid of the church, so that it's inverted with the bottom of end of the pyramid at the top, which I guess would be laity. More welcoming parishes, the anti-clericalism, and a couple of other things there. Under prayerful and Eucharistic, greater leadership from priests, better faith formation, better communication of what the church does. Someone said here a new translation of the Mass, greater involvement of the laity, listening to the Holy Spirit. There's one that got through. Better homilies. Whoops, it's a cheeky one. Better attention to aspects of the liturgy, involvement in children liturgy. Under the humble and healing, there was greater focus again on Jesus Christ, defending right to life issues, greater emphasis on the sacraments. Strangely enough, better homilies made it into this one too. Youth to be more involved in the church community, welcoming parishes, fighting for human rights, a greater focus on Jesus. And in the last one, which was about joy and hope, starts with better homilies. Someone's really hammering this better homilies. Again, greater focus on Jesus, access to mass and reconciliation, more focus on permanent deacons, parish pastoral council, working together in unity, sharing the faith with others, and it goes on and on and on. So I might pass it to you guys first. Jerry, that was a long shopping list, and it wasn't even a quarter of the things that were said. But what do you think of from that list? What stands out to you? Or what else do you possibly might need to be added as well?
Well, I agree with you in terms of the marriage, help for married couples, and things like that, because obviously we've got a vested interest in those sort of things. I think on the whole aspect of this is to look at how the Catholic Church can evangelize in the 21st century. Because, hearing talks and discussions and things like that, podcasts and others, it seems like there is a move away from the Catholic Church. Young people will join and many more might be leaving. But I suppose one of the things that we didn't have, even up to 10, 15 years ago, was this ability, such as what we're doing now, podcasting and other things like that, where we have the ability to reach into their lives as opposed to them coming to us. So it's a completely new ball game. Nothing that happened in the past can really cover what we can do or what we should be doing now. There's nothing that happened in the 60s that talked about being able to speak directly to someone from 100 miles away. Having people on overhead projectors and speaking directly or via telecommunications. There's nothing like that. And so I think for the church to not so much embrace the 21st century, but to be able to evangelize in the 21st century, a lot of these ideas can sort of focus on that.
Yeah, that's true. We're in a modern era, and that's probably one of the things that we need to look at as a church. The Second Vatican Council talked about how to represent the church in modern society, and Pope John the 23rd's great call was to read the signs of the times. And I think that's exactly what you're doing. Is you're reading where we are right now and saying how can we be church in this era.
I think a way to exemplify it is Bishop Robert Barron was Father Robert Barron many years ago, and we got hold of his Catholicism series, a physical DVD copy of it, and even thinking back even further, the only way we'd be finding out about this sort of stuff. See, right now we're on the SQPN podcast, speaking directly to Americans and other nationalities. How limited were we, 15 years ago? Not that we were podcasting or producing media then, but how limited were we that long ago in terms of speaking to the global church, speaking to the world, if you like?
You're right. We certainly have the equipment, the ability now to sit around in someone's house or use Skype to record podcasts, something that many people couldn't do, say, in the last, maybe 2 decades ago or so.
Yeah, 15 is probably understating it a bit.
Yeah. Say in the days of Netscape Navigator when the internet was a bit of a mess. But certainly these things exist and Catholics have access to them. I went to a conference. It was called the Catholic New Media Conference, and it was Father Roderick came to Melbourne. He used to be part of the SQPN, and he was presenting and talking about how there are so many Catholics on the internet today, and the question was, where are you? Why can't we hear your voices? There's such a massive online presence. 1.2 billion Catholics in the world, let's get their voices out there, and let's be a church for the 21st century. And so I guess in a sense what the Plenary Council is saying. How do we do that? Technology was listed as one of those things in the word clouds as well. But if we want to help Christ's voice reach others, then technology is certainly an avenue to help us do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things within the Catholic Church structure itself that can be improved, and that's always going to be the case. It's never going to be perfect because that's heaven, so to speak. So there's always things that can be improved. So for me, that's probably one of the biggest things is how can we, as part of the church, be evangelizers? It's not my strong point to be an evangelizer, but how can everything else that's all mentioned here helps us to be a better evangelizer, helps us to bring God's church as it's meant to be, not as people see it. How can we bring it to the world?
Those are great thoughts. Caroline, let's pass it over to you. What stood out from you from those word clouds? Anything that the Australian Church is saying that resonates with you?
I mean, I just think that the whole idea of this plenary council is just wonderful. You know, like the church inviting us, the lay people, to give our opinions on what we think needs to improve and how we make it a more like user-friendly church, you know, and maybe cut out the separation, you know, sometimes you can feel between yourself and the hierarchy of the church. And, you know, for us to have a voice and to have more access and just to feel like we belong on another level, not just, you know, in our small parish, going to church every Sunday with our community, but so that we could be a broader community together. And, you know, so we can, you know, help to improve each other and to better evangelize and all feel a part of the one big church, you know. And I think that gives us more encouragement, I guess, to be able to, you know, help to steer the church in the right direction. And what I mean by that is, you know, to help it to continue to focus on what Jesus really meant for the church to be. You know, it's not all about, I mean, you know, all of our beautiful traditions and ceremonies, you know, they're integral part of our church, but it also is the church on the ground, you know, working with people, working with communities, working with those who need some support, you know, helping our faith to develop and what does the church really mean? What is its real focus? What's its real mission? So I really think this is a wonderful thing that's being done. So I don't have a particular favorite cloud such, but I just think that the whole thing is just wonderful, and it's really beneficial for all of us as Catholics practicing our faith. And yeah, I just think that, yeah, it's just encouraging to see that the church is trying to continually improve itself and include all of us in it as well.
Sounds to me like you've perfectly described the importance of faith in action. I think that's really nice, Caroline. Yeah. What stood out for me is not particular words, but is some of the particular sentiments that that I feel very strongly about. So, for example, I worry about people who are too afraid to step into a Catholic church. So what I mean by that are people who self-describe themselves as sinners who are not good enough to be there or not worthy enough to be there. And sometimes it's because of things that have been accidentally said to them or deliberately, but that don't represent Christ and who Christ is. And maybe that's better formation. It's better messages that are given, or more accurate, maybe messages that are given to them by our priests, by evangelizers who are prominent. Because the problem is there are a lot of Catholic voices online, and unfortunately, not all of them say things that gel really well with the gospel. And I'm not thinking of particular political sides. I'm just thinking particularly of people who tend to think they know a lot about Catholicism but don't. And I won't mention names because they're all trying to do Christ's work genuinely. However, some people who identify in particular ways believe they're not welcome in the church because of something that they've heard or that's been said. And you see that then expressed in the greater narrative of media stories, where it's always the church is anti this, the church doesn't like that, the church doesn't welcome this. But actually, Christ spoke to every human. And if you read the Gospels, he spoke to all kinds of peoples who were self-described sinners, outcasts, not worthy. These are the people that were actually sent out to meet and evangelize if they happen to come into our lives. So I think from the council, I think the inclusive theme stuck with me. And I'm not talking about the modern definition of inclusivity where everyone is welcome. Unless you don't agree with them, then they're not welcome. This inclusive, okay, environment, whatever. But what I'm talking about more is the actual inclusiveness, which is where a person feels like they can walk into a church and they'll be welcomed by the people of God who are there on Christ's behalf for them. I would like to see that transformational church where people's lives really are changed at a deeper level. And I'm really passionate about that, especially when I hear voices in the church that don't necessarily do that well. They hit on doctrine, it's this or it's nothing. But our lives are not like that, are not that black and white. And we have to help people journey from where they are to where Christ is calling them to be. And you can't do that by saying, no, you're a sinner, you're wrong. There's a lot more of that journey that comes with that. All right, so off my high horse.
No, well said, Lindsay, I agree.
Yeah, but I am pleased to see what the council is doing, and I'm excited for what will probably come out of it afterwards. Jerry, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
While it seems like it's taking a long time, so we're still 15 months before this council actually meets, I think it's good that they're taking their time, or taking time is probably the best way I can think of to describe it, in doing it properly. They're not rushing it. They're not saying, okay, we've got all these ideas together. Let's just cross off 90% of them. We're left with 10. We'll go with that. And let's get it done next week. Get it out there to the masses as soon as we can. No, they're taking their time. They're properly discerning. I mean, it's been started for years ago, hasn't it? Or months ago, at least. The whole process is a time-consuming endeavour. But I believe with the amount of time and effort that's being put into it, surely it will bear fruit.
Yeah, and what I like also is that this meeting next year, my understanding is not the only one. It's the first one in Perth, and then the next one is on the east coast of Australia somewhere, in Melbourne. But the whole idea is they'll now deliberate on what's being given to them, and then pass it back to the people, the laity, to run their eyes over it and see if the bishops are up to date with what people are saying, as in listening to what the Spirit is saying to the faithful. Or if they've missed the boat completely. And I'm glad the bishops are open to that kind of discussion as well. So rather than that top down, I think they are doing the reverse pyramid by having this council. One example of a bishop who's already acting on this is Archbishop Peter Comensoli, our Archbishop in Melbourne. Our parish priest announced today that Archbishop Comensoli is making a pastoral visit to our parish in August. He's not coming to do a sacrament or anything else. It's a pastoral visit. And it's because he knows and is very acutely aware of the background of our parish in terms of the sex abuse crisis. And what
I'm so
happens.
glad he's coming. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So it's good that he's doing that because he's recognized a need and he's doing something about it. And I think that's a beautiful expression of a proactive bishop who fits the bill of what you were saying before, Caroline.
Maybe we'll see if we can corner him and get an interview. Might be asking a bit much.
If we can get his voice on this podcast, I'd be very excited.
Oh,
No promises. Yeah. All right. So we'll tie it up there and we'll move on because Caroline is very, very excited about the next segment. So why don't we talk about science?
What a fine day for science.
You have any hobbies?
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
Can you reverse the polarity?
I'll do my best.
Science, 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 science. Science, 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 science. Yeah, I like science.
So Caroline, we're in your celestial hands now. So you wanted to talk about the anniversary, the 50th anniversary, I think it was, of the moon landing. And we've got a few
Yes.
things to share about that.
Those
So,
very
Caroline, as they say in The Flash, run, Barry, run. Go for it.
Okay, I'm going to run. I have so much to talk about. I'm sure I'm going to leave a lot out, but I'm just so excited. This whole topic, you could talk. I think we could do several podcasts alone just on this. But so yeah, today I really wanted to highlight the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission, landing when men first, went to the moon and landed on the moon. It's such an exciting. I mean, even 50 years ago, I wasn't born in 1969. I was 10 years T-minus 10, but I was 10 years away from being born. But even just experiencing it now, YouTube videos, podcasts, documentaries. I just feel still so excited about that we even managed to do it. It's just such an amazing feat. So much went into this. I guess it all started really with the Russians, believe it or not, with the USSR. In 1957, Sputnik, the satellite, was orbiting Earth, and people were wondering what's going on here. What have the Russians done? We had no idea about this. It was fascinating to watch some, interviews with people on the ground, and it was the American public, and they were saying, we're not sure what they're trying to do. Are they trying to launch some kind of a missile, or is it some kind of weapon, or they were just so distrusting of the USSR at the time. And then at the same year, the Russians also launched poor little Laika, the dog, into space. She orbited around the Earth. Needless to say, she obviously didn't make it back alive, but they wanted to see. It is. And she wasn't the first dog. They launched a few dogs. Having said that, they launched a few people as well. In 1961, the USSR launched the first astronaut to orbit the Earth that we know of, called Yuri Gagarin, and he made it back fine. And that was in April 1961. But then in May, the USA got a guy into space, Alan Shepard, and so the race was on. So I think the Americans got the fever of wanting to get into space as well. And a few things led up to it happening. So it actually started back in 1959 with the Mercury program, which was a US crewed program. That finished in 1963. In the meantime, John F. Kennedy, President JFK, we all know about him. He was very excited, and he announced to the world that the USA would be the first people to land a man on the moon. And what he said was that we should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. And those were his words. So this was
made it.
Yes, and and this was something they really wanted to achieve. Having said that, the documentary I saw the day after, he kind of wanted to take it back because he kind of underestimated how much money this really would cost to do.
How much you say?
There was so much money in this project. By today's standards, it's just millions and billions of dollars. But having said that, at that time we hadn't launched anyone out into space, so we had to start from scratch. And this all kind of started with the development of ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. And we actually had a German. He actually used to be with the Nazis, and his name was Dr. von Braun, and he was taken up by the Americans, and he was actually into the V2 rockets, with the Germans. So he developed those. He managed to get Hitler to develop those instead of airplanes, which was interesting. And now he's come to America and he's convinced us that we need to get to the moon and we need to develop space missions. So
I think before the end of the Second World War, as it was dying, the the Germans had some rocketry and
They did.
launch missiles
They
on,
did.
like, say, Britain, but
Yes, they
too late
did.
to do anything to turn the tide of the war by then, thankfully.
That's right. Thank God for that. Yes, yeah, definitely. So they didn't actually get to use too many of them. I mean, if you see the videos of the trials, a lot of them managed to blow up before they got to be actually any use. So it took quite a while for them to develop anything. But then his expertise was quite useful into developing rockets for the USA. And so we go on to the Gemini program, which started in 1963, ended in 1966. And this is where NASA practiced rendezvous in space and EVAs, which are extra vehicular activity, which means, man going out of a rocket into space, and being tethered just by this little umbilical cord. Firstly, actually, a Russian man was able to do that, but then not long after that, in good tradition, the Americans managed to achieve the same thing in 1965. And we had astronaut Ed White, and he spent 21 minutes in space, and he had like a handheld maneuvering unit, and the footage shows how cumbersome this was. He was like floating up and down all over the place. He couldn't. It wasn't a beautiful like floating. It was just like a little bit this way, a little bit this way. Oh, I'm stuck in the cord. Oh. But he had such a good time.
It was only meant to be a 2-minute trip.
That's it.
It
It
took
actually
21 minutes
was.
to get back in.
The thing is, NASA kept calling him back. Time to get back in the get back in the vehicle. Back in the vehicle. He's, what? Have to get back in. And he managed to drag it out to 21 minutes. He was having such a great time. Yeah. So that.
And why wouldn't you?
I mean, how many times would you be able to do that? So, and the next mission was obviously after the announcement by John F. Kennedy, the Apollo mission. So that ran from 1961 to 1972. Unfortunately, the first Apollo 1 did not start well. It was a very sad occasion where 3 crew were in a test. So they were thinking of launching, and so they got them into a command module. They did a rehearsal. Unfortunately, they caught fire inside. They were unable to escape, and they died. It was so tragic, and I couldn't. The footage just I couldn't even. Yeah, it was so devastating. NASA managed to find. They think that because they used 100% oxygen atmosphere inside, and it may have triggered a spark, and a fire began, and so the guys, they couldn't. The latch on the door wouldn't even open. I think they created like a vacuum inside, and they couldn't escape. So they basically died of smoke inhalation. NASA tried to tell everyone, they died instantly, but unfortunately they took a little while. It took a few minutes, unfortunately, which is just horrible. Which, you'd think it was a setback, but to their credit, they moved on. They kept developing. I guess you don't want them to die in vain. NASA had a good look. They look at themselves and look at their procedures, and they found that they were kind of a bit sloppy and complacent about the way they were doing things. So they really upped their game, and they had a lot more success after that. They developed so 2 other really significant Apollo missions that I really enjoyed learning about was Apollo 8 and Apollo 9, and these were carried out in the Saturn V rocket. So this was the brand new rocket that was developed by NASA. It was an amazing, massive rocket, so powerful. You watch those launches, and today I still get chills. It's like, that is amazing. That is amazing. So Apollo 9 was a mission where they had 3 astronauts. They orbited the moon. They practiced, going to the moon, orbited the Earth, did a thing called I'm so excited. I'm just losing what I want to say. So a TLI is a translunar insertion. So what that means is basically escaping the atmosphere, the orbit of the Earth, heading off to the moon, getting into the lunar orbit, and then coming back, getting out of that orbit, and then heading back to Earth. So that was their mission, to fly around the moon and then come back home. And so they did this in December. They were around the moon on December 24th in 1968. And this is where they get, I'm not sure if you've seen, there's a picture of Earthrise. It's called Earthrise. So basically they're seeing the surface of the moon, and then out of nowhere, their minds are blown. They see the Earth rising, their beautiful planet just rising there, and they were mesmerized. They were, you see the footage today, and it's like, that is gorgeous, amazing. So there were some beautiful photos taken by the astronauts there. You see the footage of them quickly scrambling, oh my gosh, look at that. They're passing the lenses to each other. Quick, we've got to get photos. So they took a lot of photos of that. And another thing too, because they were there over Christmas, they thought they needed to do something special. And so they read from Genesis to the whole world. They broadcast this reading, which was really touching. It was so lovely. They thought it summed it up perfectly, how they were feeling, seeing their beautiful Earth from the moon. And then following Apollo 8 was Apollo 9, which was also carried out in the Saturn V. And this time they were just orbiting Earth. And what they did was they took out the full Apollo spacecraft this time. So it was made up of the Command and Service module and the Lunar module. Now, they had to practice the maneuvers that would be carried out when they got to the moon and on the way to the moon. So basically, they had to practice going around the Earth, getting out of orbit. Now, the lunar module had to kind of detach and then spin around and then reattach to the command module so that it would be in the right orientation for when they were in lunar orbit, and then the lunar module could detach and land on the moon. This was a really tricky maneuver that they had to really get it right, so it needed to be practiced before they could go do it first time, on the actual run on the moon. And so those were amazing in themselves. Then the magic time came. 20th of April, 1969. We had 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. They were the ones chosen to actually go to the moon, land on the moon. So we had Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, we've all heard of, who were the men that actually were in the lunar module and landed on the moon, while Michael Collins stayed back orbiting the moon while the other guys were on the moon itself, carrying out experiments. And as a side note, who was transmitting these images, receiving these images and transmitting them back to NASA? Australia.
Yes.
So we have a big dish at Parkes, which is in central west region of New South Wales, and we had another one called Honeysuckle Creek. Now, a funny thing is when they got to the moon, they detached from the main module, and the lunar module landed on the moon successfully, which was amazing in itself. So what happened is the NASA said to them, okay, guys, Neil and Buzz, have your sleep now. You've been awake for all this time. You must be tired. Have a sleep, and then you can go on the moon. And they're like, Neil Armstrong said, no, I want to go on the moon now. They had to fix up a few things first, and then he's like, I'm not sleeping. I want to go on the moon. So what happened is, the Parkes was supposed to be transmitting first, but, it wasn't quite in the right alignment. So there's another dish at Honeysuckle Creek, south of Canberra, who had to quickly scramble and say, okay, yeah, we can transmit, we're right, so let's do it. So the first few minutes were received by the Honeysuckle Creek, and then there was about 8 minutes, I think, and then the rest came from Park. So that was all received by Australia. So that's just a pretty cool side note for us.
Before you go on,
yes,
did you read also that they had been talking for a while about getting a TV quality broadcast camera onto the lunar lander?
Oh yes, that's right.
And they're worried about the weight of it.
Yes.
So they managed to make something that could actually go on the lunar lander, and it had to be stored in the toolkit on the side of the lander, upside down.
Yes.
So when the images were beamed to Earth, they were beamed upside down, and then someone at one of these dishes had to flip a switch in order for it to be inverted, so it'd be the right way around on TV.
That's right, because otherwise, imagine everyone, those millions of people standing on their head trying to watch.
600 million people at once. That would have knocked the Earth out of orbit for sure.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, those were amazing in themselves. And I got all this information. I have to mention this excellent documentary series called Chasing the Moon. Just outlines everything beautifully if you can find it. And I've been listening to NASA podcasts as well, which, you know, just filled in like unknown stories, you know, from the people who used to work around the guys and, you know, with the guys and all that. But my favorite thing was I looked up on YouTube the footage that was transmitted of the moon landing, and it's a 3-hour video clip. And yes, I watched the whole thing and I couldn't get my eyes off it. It was as if it was happening like now, you know?
Awesome.
I mean, I love to watch NASA videos streaming as it is, you know, with the docking of the space station and all the rest of it, you know, rocket launches, just whatever they have. I just soak it in. I just love it. So this was my favorite thing to watch. It just amazed me that, I mean, you know, obviously they'd been practicing for years and getting things right for years before they got to this stage. But even the fact that they managed to get a man on the moon and get him back home still amazed me. And so I'll just go through a few things that, you know, that happened in the footage. So the footage starts with, so there's the camera view of Neil Armstrong first getting out. And, you know, he says his famous first, you know, words when he's on the moon: one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, you know, as he makes his way down the ladder and eventually, you know, gets his feet on the ground. And it's so lovely. He starts describing, the ground feels, you know, soft, and the soil is kind of going over my boot, and it's a little bit slippery. You know, he's explaining that. And, you know, he's like really commentating on what he's seeing. You know, it's beautiful, you know, so nice. And then eventually he gets the camera and he goes and sets up the camera. And then Buzz Aldrin gets to come out, and in his first words he says, I feel like he was obligated to say something, or he felt like he should say something. But he said, you know, I heard an interview and he said, you know, I felt like I should have said something. Oh, no, I was the second guy, but I wanted to say something. And he said, he just said, magnificent desolation. And it's like, that kind of struck me. I thought, wow, you know, yeah, desolation, and, you know, the fact that they managed to get there, that's magnificent. So, yeah, I just found those simple things quite profound. And so they unveiled a plaque was one of the first things they did. And the plaque says, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We come in peace. We came in peace for all mankind." Now, they were going to say "we come in peace," but NASA said, no, change it to "we came in peace." Okay, so that's, that's pretty cool. So just in case any moon men, or whoever came upon the site could read the plaque and know who put the plaque there. So, yeah, Neil Armstrong then unhooked the camera and he walks back and he points it towards the lander, and NASA is saying, oh, no, a bit to the right, no, a bit to the left. And so they get it right, you know. And so they stick it there. in all the meanwhile, they're taking photos, they're describing the landscape, the moonscape, continuing to describe the moon dust and how it's sticking to their boots and what color it is. And they plant the flag, the flag of the United States of America. They set up some experiments. They have a solar wind experiment. They have a seismometer, and immediately they start kind of measuring some moonquakes, which is very cool that they were managing to get that straight away. It was Buzz Aldrin's duty to collect rocks, and there was a bit of room at the end of the broadcast. He said, "I've got some room. I'm going to put some more stuff in here. I'm going to put some more," and they're like, and NASA's like, "Yeah, good idea, great, do it." And he's like, "Okay." And now the thing that struck me the whole time, NASA were very demanding. "Have you done this yet? Neil, have you done this? Buzz, have you done this?" "Yes, yeah, we're doing it. Okay, we're doing it. Yep, okay, we're doing it." Buzz Aldrin got caught in some cables a few times, and Neil Armstrong's like, "Oh, Buzz, just hold on. It's around your foot. Let me get it out for you." And, so it was a real thing. It was amazing. It was just, I just enjoyed they were doing their duty as astronauts, but they had a real human experience while they were doing it, which is fantastic. Another important thing, President Nixon, so he was president at the time, because unfortunately, as excited as Kennedy was towards the end of towards 1963, about the program, he actually went to NASA quite a lot, and he was so interested. He became really interested in this. Unfortunately, he was assassinated.
That's right.
Yeah, so before he got to see the program come to fruition. So at the time, it was President Nixon. So President Nixon called the astronauts. He congratulated them, and then he made an obligatory presidential speech. And then, the astronauts, saluted and thanked him. It was pretty cool. And those were the main things I really got out of this footage. So it's 3 hours long, but it was just full of just activity, just seeing these men jumping around. Oh, the other thing I enjoyed was seeing them. Oh yeah, if I step slowly, it's okay, but got to be careful not to move too fast, because then if I move this way, I'll just keep moving this way. If I try and jump, it's okay, but it's kind of taxing, it's taxing. And they were kind of shuffling around. They seemed that they felt that best mode of moving was just, small steps. So kind of shuffling around the moon.
It's kind of the original moonwalk.
Yes, that's it. So small steps, exactly, but forwards. If they went back, I think they would have been on their backpacks. Yeah, and their life support levels were constantly being read back to them, so they knew how much oxygen and so forth was in their backpacks and how much time they had left. Basically being told, you're going well, you're doing well, you're doing well. And then they were taking a lot of photos and things like that, and they were just getting the most out of the experience that they could. But they did not stop for a minute. They were constantly doing something, and they were constantly being demanded of NASA to do things. So so it wasn't like a restful vacation. They just had to keep working. So the whole 2 hours that they were there, they had to keep working. But I think they enjoyed it immensely, and their manner was very polite. So they weren't going, "Yeah, all right, hurry, I'm doing it. They were just, "Yes, NASA, okay, yes.
You get the screwdriver."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, and then eventually they took off and came back to Earth. Another interesting thing, I watched the splashdown as well. There's another video of that. And, you see the rafts coming to get. First, there's a helicopter dropping scuba divers. They come and get some life rafts, and they stabilize the lunar module. They're worried about getting contaminated. They're thinking that maybe there's something from the moon that may, pathogen or something that may infect, they don't want to let out into the Earth. So the guys had to be separate from the astronauts. There was one guy then who attached a raft to the lunar module. He stepped onto the lunar module. He was in it was like a full suit to protect him. He opened the module, threw in some suits, said, "Here, put these on," and they had to put those on, and then eventually they went back to base. The interesting thing was, this was on the NASA podcast, that the guys, the astronauts, had to be quarantined for a few weeks, but the guy who opened the module back at base and had to take unloaded the moon rocks and whatever else, magazine with photographs and, the cameras and whatever else, the experiments, then he had to be quarantined as well. So he couldn't just be let out. Although there were some other people who picked up the magazines for some reason. I'm not sure. I didn't get exactly why, but they opened the magazine. It was full of moon dust, and oh, they were in their plain clothes. They weren't quarantined. They weren't. Yeah, they weren't in protective outfits or anything. So yeah, that's just one of the funny side stories that I heard of. Yeah. So I mean, literally, I could talk on and on about this. There was so much I could get out of this whole experience. I mean, obviously, after this, it set the scene for following Apollo missions. There were a total of 24 astronauts that went to the moon. I think it was something like 14 of them, or 12 or 14, I can't remember, that actually were on the moon at various stages, different missions, the lunar buggies and all that, that we've seen. So yeah, it really set the scene for us to be able to go back to the moon. After a while, the Apollo missions stopped, but there is talk, of going back to the moon by 2024. And, that would be awesome if we could do that. I mean, we've got the technology, we've got the groundwork, excuse me. And, that would just be another amazing milestone if we could go back to the moon, I think. So, yeah. Lindsay, you pointed out an article that had a bit of a faith perspective on this.
Yeah, there were two articles that I came across, and I'll just throw them very quickly. So the first one is about Buzz Aldrin. So you talked about how Neil Armstrong said, no, we want to walk on the moon now. But they actually had to wait for a number of hours before they could actually do that. So Buzz Aldrin actually took communion to the moon. So he was a Presbyterian elder at the time, and he had permission from his church to take some wine and some bread to the moon. And I'm actually looking at the satchel, there's a picture of it right now, a satchel where he carried that with him. What he did was, at the time, he communicated back to the Earth, to the ground crew. He said, I would like to request a few moments of silence. I would like to invite each person listening in, whether and whomever he may be, to contemplate for a moment the events of the past few hours and to give thanks in his own individual way. And it says that he then reached in for the wine and the bread that he brought to space. And it says here, the first foods ever poured and eaten on the moon. And he says, I poured the wine into the chalice our church had given me. In the 1/6 gravity of the moon, the wine curled slowly and gracefully up the side of the cup. Then he read some scripture, and what he read was from John chapter 6, and he read the following. Jesus said, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever lives in me, and I live in him, will be born... sorry, I'm trying to read his handwriting here. Yeah, and bear much fruit. We know the scripture anyway. It says, but for you can do nothing without me, which is a beautiful summary of the moon landing, I think. All of man's accomplishments, the giant leap for mankind, is really because of the abilities that God has given us. Now, he said later on that he kind of regretted doing this. And he said, well, the people who were listening were Jews, atheists, Muslims, whatever else. And maybe I should have done something that represented everyone. And I reflected on this, and I thought, well, Christ is the God of all creation. And I feel like maybe we did. Whether they felt like they were represented or not, maybe they were. And I just wanted to jump ahead to 1994, when 3 Catholic astronauts took Holy Communion with permission, and they actually received Holy Communion in orbit of the Earth. And I just wanted to read briefly from the memoir of Dr. Thomas D. Jones, who flew on that space shuttle mission. And he, in his book Skywalking, an Astronomer's Memoir, wrote this really moving and beautiful account of that moment. So I'm just going to share that with you now. We'll put the link in our show notes as well. He said, I thanked God each night before falling asleep for these glorious views of Earth and for the success of our mission thus far. I asked for the continued safety of our crew and a joyful reunion with our families. I was conscious of the special gift of each day in space, aware of the unique privilege I had been granted. And I remember Father Tom Bevan's words on the beach back in Florida. When Sunday rolled around again, 2 weeks after Easter, it seemed particularly appropriate to share our thanks and the thoughts of what we, Sid, Kevin, and I, all Catholics, gathered on the flight deck one orbital night for a short communion service. Kevin, an extraordinary minister of the Eucharist, carried the Blessed Sacrament with him. The host protected within a simple golden pyx. The three of us thanked God for the views of his universe, for good companions, and for the success granted our crew so far. Then Kevin shared the body of Christ with Sid and me, and we floated weightless on the flight deck, silently reflecting on this moment of peace and true communion with Christ. As we meditated quietly in the darkened cockpit, a dazzling white light burst through space and into the cabin. Pure radiance from the risen sun streams through Endeavour's forward cockpit, windows, and bathed us in its warmth. What else could this be but a sign? God's gentle affirmation of our union with him. Drifting parallel to the floor, I rolled away from my crewmates, embarrassed at my reaction to the singular sunrise. Through tears, I looked instead to the overhead windows at the Pacific below, the dawn painting its surface with a rich, limitless blue. Look at that, I called out almost unconsciously to my friends. From the living water below, we drank in hues unmatched by the palette of any human artist. After a moment, Kevin said simply, "It's the blue of the Virgin's veil, Tom." He was right. He had found the perfect way to express the vision we were seeing out the window. Now, I just read that for the first time literally 10 minutes before our podcast, and I was almost tearing up just reading that. It's just a beautiful spiritual experience, isn't it? That's what I wanted to say about communion in space. And Jared, what did you want to add to this?
Well, I think going back to our first topic of the plenary council, I think all we need to do is send Catholics and laity and everyone to space.
That's it. It's very evangelizing from the sounds of it. Very moving. All right. So why don't we wrap it up there and just finish off with a very, very space-oriented entertainment segment.
I don't know where you get your delusions, laser brain.
This is not what we came here to do.
No, but it's what I'm going to do.
I have a plan. You've got a plan. I have part of a plan. Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
So for this segment, guys, I'm very excited. Now, I did a podcast with Caroline about the new Star Trek Captain Picard series that's coming out. And they released a second trailer this morning. Now, this podcast has been recorded 2 weeks before it's released, or one, whatever it is. Oh, actually, it's 1 week. You're right. But anyway, by then, within 7 days, everyone who's listening would have had a chance to watch the trailer by then. So spoilers all around. So the trailer depicts Captain Picard in his 20 years after his service to Starfleet, and it's full of awesome cameos that made me go, whoa. So the first cameo is Seven of Nine from Star Trek Voyager, which is awesome. And the second cameo is Data, who I didn't think would be in it because Data's character actually died in Star Trek Nemesis. So clearly something's going on there.
Yeah, that's a big familiar one to get in. That's really good.
Yeah, so it's awesome to see those cameos. And so from the looks of it, this is kind of a Romulan Borg-themed kind of series. There seems to be some kind of intrigue there. It seems like from the looks of it, the Romulans are obsessed with finding humans or anyone else who had previously been, the technical term is not Borgified, but that's the term I'll use, had been assimilated by the Borg and getting something out of them. There seems to be, strangely, a Borg cube with kind of Romulan technology, so something really bizarre going on there. And somehow Captain Picard gets, I should say Admiral Picard, who's retired, gets dragged into all of this as well. So I was really excited about that.
That sounds
Just some
really
other Star
cool,
Trek
yeah.
news very quickly. There's some other Star Trek content that will be coming out as well. So, for example, Star Trek Discovery Season 3 is coming next year, and they talked about that. And for those spoiler alert in case you haven't seen it yet, but Discovery has to travel to the future at the end of the series in order to beat the Section 31 AI that's gone crazy. And they successfully do that, except we don't know in the series where they end up. But according to the description of the writers of the series, they don't end up in the future where it was they were meant to be. So, some intrigue there. And strangely enough, there's a Star Trek comedy animated series called Star Trek Lower Decks, and that's coming out. It's by the creators of the Rick and Morty series, and it's meant to be a comedy about a starship that doesn't matter, and it's actually about some lower decks kind of crew member ensigns that don't matter either. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting to watch.
They usually don't have a long lifetime in a Star Trek movie, do they?
If they're wearing red shirts, they're in a lot of trouble. And lastly, they're going to be making some more Star Trek shorts. And these are basically just short Star Trek stories of about 10 minutes or so, just with some intrigue. But what's really exciting me is that there is going to be a Captain Pike one. There is going to be a Spock and Number One. Apparently the Spock and Number One episode is just about them being stuck in a turbo lift together. So, and also there's going to be one that links the 20 years before Captain Picard to the Captain Picard day, like the series. So that'll be really interesting. And apparently 2 animated ones that we don't know what they're going to be. So, Jerry, you excited for some new Star Trek content?
Oh yeah, well I'm all sort of on the outside of Star Trek, watching the main movies and occasionally episodes here and there. I'm no good on the lore of it, LORE lore. So I get confused sometimes who's friends with who and not in terms of races, but like which captain is which crew member and that sort of thing. Like I think Captain Jonathan Archer, where's his Spock, and things like that. But the storyline, I enjoyed the storylines there. And that sort of stuff. So yeah, certainly excited for Star Trek. There's so much of it coming out now.
And you're going to have to own, I don't know how many different streaming services in order to be able to watch it all too. And Caroline, how about you? You excited for some Star Trek?
Super excited. They do sound really, really good. But, I'm waiting for the third season of The Orville, to tell you the truth. Yes. I love that series.
That other Star Trek.
The other Star Trek, yeah. But, they did it so well. If it's very Star Trek-y, very funny, and what more do you want?
Yeah, true. I'm also really excited. This is super nerdy, but Paramount is apparently considering releasing a 4K version of Star Trek The Motion Picture, the director's cut. Now, Star Trek The Motion Picture has a mixed reputation. It's been described by some as the crew staring at the view screen for the whole episode because it's all shipboard except for the very end of it. But I actually love that movie a lot, so I'm kind of excited about seeing a really clean, done-up edition of it. I think it'd be really good. And I actually like the director's cut. They take out a lot of the boring bits and make it a pretty decent movie. So let's wrap it up there. So what we want to do, first of all, to say goodbye, is to firstly thank all of our patrons. So the patrons are the people who make the StarQuest network able to continue. So today I'd like to thank Daniel D, Kelly B, Max S, Rochelle K, and Familia Napuri. So thank you for your generous donations. They make all the shows on the StarQuest production network possible. Speaking of other shows, there's a couple of new shows that we'd like you to check out. So first of all, there is the American Catholic History, which is a great show. So they release 10-minute or so episodes per week, and they talk about significant Catholic events in the history of the United States. So recently, for example, they discussed Margaret Hari, who was famous for her charity work for orphans, widows, and others. And she sounds to me very much like Australia's Caroline Chisholm. So there was a lot that was relatable there. They also, interestingly, talked about a court case in 1813 involving Father Anthony Coleman. And it was about the Seal of Confession. There's been a few SQPN podcasts about the Seal of Confession lately. So that's a great historical one. So check that out. And also another one that I'm really enjoying is called Raising the Bets. And this is by the leader of SQPN, the one who makes it all possible and does all the editing for us.
Yes, I'm enjoying that
and
one
Raising
too.
the Bets is about him and his wife, Melanie Bettinelli, and they talk about their family and things that are happening in their lives. And there's been some really, really interesting content there. So it'd be really good for people to subscribe and check that one out as well.
You even got a shout out from Dom because you gave him feedback and he commented about what you said on one of the podcasts.
Yes, you're right. I did. I called it relatable, and I thought it really was. Married couple talking about their family life and kids, and that was hey, wait a minute, I can actually relate to some of those stories. So that's good. Although my kids
Yeah,
haven't been as
exactly.
sick or as poisoned as theirs have been, and hopefully never will
Yeah,
be. But
my kids are sick all the time too,
But
yeah.
really, really, really good stuff. So we'd also like to know your thoughts about the topics we've discussed today. So you can send us feedback by visiting sqpn.com/Oz, spelled OZ, where you can find our show notes, including a whole lot of Caroline's copious notes and links about the moon landing. You can also visit us at the SQPN Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. We also have our own Catholics of Oz Facebook page at facebook.com/Catholics of Oz, and we'd love for you to join us there and talk about our content there. You can also reach us by email at catholics-of-oz@sqpn.com. Jerry, thanks for being part of the show today.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And Caroline, thanks for being part of the show.
Oh, it was really fun. Thank you for letting me rant on about space for that long.
No worries. It was really interesting. That was your Jimmy Akin moment, I think. You did really well. And once again, I'm Lindsay Sand, and thank you for listening to the Catholics of Oz on StarQuest.